All right, we're back at it. Session 3, the significance of small groups in discipleship. Here's a little John Wesley for you. He wrote this in 1763. I was more convinced than ever that preaching like an apostle, without joining together those that are awakened and training them up in the ways of God, is only begetting children for the murderer. How much preaching has there been for these 20 years all over Pembrokeshire, but no regular societies, no discipline, no order or connection, and the consequence is that 9 in 10 of those once awakened are now faster asleep than ever. You've heard, I'm sure, the statement from George Whitefield, one of the greatest evangelists of that day, in which he said, the difference is my converts are like a rope of sand, which of course was washed out with the tide, and Wesley's still remain. Now, it's more than an issue of holding you together, however. There is something very grace-connected. But as we talk about it, let's just keep this in mind. That for Wesley, he would not go somewhere and preach unless you agreed that you would meet together in groups. He saw no good in just preaching the gospel. He said it's like having a child and giving it to a murderer. Now, I will say this, that there's a very interesting tell in this statement that you might not pick up on, but I'm going to make you aware of. And he said, once awakened. In Wesley's concept of prevenient grace, that is, the grace that goes before to draw you to God. And I mentioned this earlier, there are 4 steps to that. There are 4 steps to that idea of prevenient grace. Number 1 is called awakening. That's when God taps you on the shoulder and you say, oh. Now, in awakening, you go from being spiritually in a slumber, you're going through life without God in the world, and all of a sudden now you're aware of something. You're aware of God's existence, you're aware of your sin, you're aware of your need. That awareness is called awakening. It's an actual act of grace that occurs in an unsaved person. What's happened is we have misunderstood that action. We think somebody's born again oftentimes when they're just awakened. Now, I gave you those stories earlier about the guys who were saved at 8, but they still go off into sin. It's because they were awakened. You have somebody preaching a hot sermon, you can smell the bacon cooking, what the hell is that real to you? And all of a sudden you say, oh my goodness, I don't want to go to hell. So you rush to the altar where you pray that prayer and you say, Jesus, I don't want to go to hell. I want to be saved. And the preacher says, all right, praise the Lord. We had 3 people saved today. Wait a minute, you had some people awakened. You don't get to decide when you're saved. You'll be born again when God saves you. Paul prayed for three days. You're not better than Paul. Etc. Now, but that awakening is a real thing. It's a real thing. It's the germination of a seed underground. It's germinating. You can't always see it. You certainly don't see new life yet. They may be just as they were in the past, but now they're aware of God, they're asking questions, they're stirred up. That awakening is a real thing. We make it into something that it's not. And we think this awakened guy is now saved because we don't know what salvation does and how it works. And so, but once you're awakened, here's Wesley's unique view of prevenient grace. When you're awakened, you have liberty to say yes or no to that. If you fight against it, you will go back into that slumber. If you keep on in the sin, you will go back into that slumber and you go on with your life. You may be awakened multiple times in your life, in fact. If you react positively to the awakening, you go on to the next section, which is conviction. If you act negatively on the conviction, oftentimes when people are convicted and they know there's an empty hole, they will fill it with anything they can, other sin, they'll go deeper in sin. You'll go backwards. But if you react positively to the conviction, you find drawing God begins to draw you. If you're seeking him in the conviction, he will draw you. If you act negatively to the drawing, you're suddenly afraid, what's God going to do with me? He might take me somewhere I don't want to go. You go backwards and you go all the way back sometimes. But if you're positive with it, you go on to the fourth level, which is faith. If you're awakened to God in your sin, you're convicted by God, and now you're being drawn and you are positively moving toward God, he'll even give you the faith to trust him. So that's Wesley's unique view of prevenient grace. Almost every Wesley scholar I've ever heard talk about this say, we don't know where he got that until one brilliant, good-looking young theologian found the answer. And I'll tell you today, what most Wesley scholars don't know is Wesley got that view of prevenient grace from an Irish philosopher theologian named Peter Brown. Brown, B-R-O-W-N-E. That's where he gets it from. Now, that being said, when somebody's awakened, what do you do with them? Now, think about this. Just think logically about this. They're now aware of God. They're aware of this hole in their heart. They're aware of their need. What do you do with that person? What you don't want to do is leave him alone. Because sin is great. Sin's powerful. And there's lots of people who will help him go right back to that slumber. And that's what Wesley says happens out of 9 out of 10 if you don't put him in a group. Now, it might be that out of curiosity, they start reading something or they'll start going, they'll do it some. 1 out of 10 maybe. But 9 out of 10 will go back into the slumber. I've seen it over and over again. People who start, in fact, I'll tell you this little story. There's a lady who started going to my church. I knew her because in Mississippi, there's a radio network called Super Talk Mississippi all over the state. She was the news lady for that station all over the state of Mississippi. She started coming to my church. There's a couple their last name is Grace. They're strong Christians. They invited her. Sharon Grace she's retired now from Mississippi State, but she is the cat expert in Mississippi. Every veterinarian knows her because they've had her class at Mississippi State. She's the cat person. They start coming to my church. They invite their neighbor. She starts coming. This lady, her name is Andy. She starts coming, and one day she texted me on a Monday. She said, listen, I've never known really anything about God in my whole life. She said, I've never experienced God. I don't even understand what it means to feel God. She said, until yesterday. When I took communion, she said, something happened. And for the first time in my life, I experienced God. I don't even know what to do with that. And I said, let me tell you what he's doing. And I explained prevenient grace to her. I said, God's drawing you to himself. I said, you've got to be careful in this moment. You're awakened now. She wasn't really convicted, but she was awakened. I said, you're awakened, and what God's going to do is he's going to bring you to this thing. He's going to start showing you, and he's going to start walking you toward himself. That's what he's doing. He's drawing you to himself. That's what in the video that just came out with 7-Minute Seminary that I'm on, that's what I say about prevenient grace instead of common grace. In the Reformed Church, common grace is the ability to do some good. Prevenient grace is not that. Prevenient grace draws you to God. That's the difference. I said, God's going to draw you. You know what she did? She backed up. Yeah, she hadn't been in church in a long time. But she backed up on that. I think she got scared. As you go into conviction, it's difficult, particularly if you don't know what's going on. Now, I told her what's going on, but some people don't know it. They come to your church on Sunday morning, they get awakened, and if you're not confused enough to think they're saved, they might go home and say, man, I don't know what to do with this feeling I've got. What is this? And it scares them. And they'll go deeper in sin at that moment. That's why Wesley said, I'm not going somewhere to preach and then not put them in groups. That doesn't make sense to me, he says. So why do awakened people do better if they're put in groups? Keep that in the back of your mind. That's a rhetorical question. Why do awakened people do better if they're put in groups? Keep that in your mind. This is from the book Restoring the Wesleyan Class Meeting. Scott James and Molly Ann Davis Scott, too many names. They said the societies proclaimed and explained the doctrine. The class meeting was designed to implement the behavioral quest of a holy lifestyle, and the bands facilitated the cultivation of inner purity and the purging of the attitudes. Here's the thing. John Wesley did not invent these things. He did, however, organize them in a way that worked like never before. This is how Wesley did evangelism and discipleship. More people were saved and sanctified in the class meeting than in a church service. See, we think, let me just kind of challenge you. We think that on Sunday morning, I've heard, people have told me this. I mean, I've only been preaching. This month, Adam, marks my 42nd year? What is it, 42nd year? No, 40th year of preaching. I should be better. But 1986, January 16, 1986, my first sermon, preached, my pastor had 2 churches. He was in a wheelchair, post-polio syndrome, one glass eye. I was kind of his assistant, but I was called to preach, and he knew it. His wife called me on Saturday, January 15, and said, I got a problem. He's been sick all week. He won't be able to preach at the churches. Can you do it? I said, sure. Then I was like, what do I do? I'd never preached before. So anyway, that's my first sermon. Where was I going with that?
We think what happens on Sunday morning.
Yes, I've had people tell me Sunday morning should be an evangelism. This is evangelism. I disagree. For Wesley, well, by the way, how often did Wesley give an altar call, you think? He's very evangelistic. How often do you think he gave it? Every time? The altar was invented in 1802. Wesley died in 1791. He gave no altar calls. Now, did people respond? Yeah. People in the pews at times, they fell on the floor. They were under conviction. But an altar call, no, that was 1802. Reverend Aaron Hunt, New York City Methodist preacher, invented what we know as the altar and the altar call. But what should be happening on Sunday morning? For Wesley, people were saved and sanctified in basically the class meetings. Maybe the bands for sanctification, but class meeting was the time. So here's how he had it set up, 3 levels. He started with the society because they were already going. Societies were a thing. Society was everybody, all ages and sex, both sexes could come. And it was everybody. They showed up, and what they did was somebody was probably reading a book to them. They were just reading doctrinal stuff, doctrinal teaching. Maybe they were talking about justification or whatever, who knows what. But then what he noticed was people he said they weren't caring for the souls of men. How do you get your hands on somebody? Discipleship, how do we do this? So what he did was he designed a system whereby he said, why don't we break you up, maybe 10 or 12 people, and you would have a class leader who was the person who cared for the souls of men. Now, before I go on to tell you more about this, let me tell you the next level. Then you had 10 and 12, and then he said, how do you really get intimate? I mean, how do you get down to the nitty gritty, or as we say in the fancy world, nitty gritty? How do you do it? How about 3 or 4 people, all men about the same age, all women same age, and there's not necessarily a leader, but the 3 or 4 of you are going to hold each other accountable. How did you sin this week? Where was your failure this week, and what did you do about it? That's pretty tough right there. And there's other sub bands I could talk about, but that's the 3 basic levels. Now I will tell you about one sub band. If you fell into sin, you're out. Like, okay, you say, well, I did struggle with the sin. How'd you get over it? Well, I'm still struggling. Okay, well, here's what we're going to do. we're removing you from the class, and when you're ready, we're going to put you in what's called a penitent band, and you're going to be trained there until we feel like you're back ready, and then we'll put you back in the class. So it was a whole system of discipleship. So if you're in a class, for instance, 10 or 12 of you, and you're asking each other, not as intimate question as the band was, but there are questions they would ask. They would talk about what you did in the means of grace, basically, and they practice the means of grace, like works of piety and works of mercy. They did works of mercy as a group. And guess what? That class leader would visit every class member every week in their home, and they took account of their soul. Now you think about that. You're in, let's say Monday night, you're in a meeting with everybody getting some doctrinal training. Then maybe Thursday night, you're in a class with 10 or 12 people where this guy who was just at your house yesterday talking to you about your soul is now asking you about how you're doing the means of grace and making sure you're doing these things, keeping you accountable in that sense. Not only that, but on Friday night, you go into a band with 3 or 4 people who are down saying, can I tell you what people think about you? I mean, that's pretty rough. Tell me about your sin this week. What kind of spiritual growth would you have in those moments? I mean, that's crazy. But in the classes, oftentimes, because you had a person assigned to your soul and a class that was holding you accountable to be in the means of grace, that's where a lot of people were coming to faith in Christ and or moving even closer in sanctification. This definition by these 2 people, the society proclaimed and explained the doctrine. The class meeting was designed to implement the behavioral quest. That is, did you read the Bible this week? And how was it? What did you read? What did you study? What did you learn? How often did you pray, and what happened in that prayer? How can we help you do it better? Etc. All these things, these questions, and the behavioral actions that we're going to hold you accountable for, and of course, then the band's getting down to the nitty-gritty of the spiritual life in that deep. This is where the evangelism and sanctification, discipleship was occurring. That's Methodism. That is the basis of Methodism.
But that was his method.
That was his method. He organized that, and that's how it grew into tens and then hundreds of thousands and then millions of people who are Methodist. However, we lost some of that. Now, let me just give you my own theory, but I know I don't know everything. But my own theory of looking at it. In American Methodism, we started off pretty good. But a preacher might have a dozen churches across half a state. He'd come around every couple of weeks, possibly. Maybe on a Thursday. You had church on Thursday when he showed up. The lay leaders, like the class leader, was extremely important. And the pastor, he trained up the lay leaders and the church leader, the class leaders. A class leader had those 10 or 12 people, and he was ministering to them. And you had multiples. And then you had a lay leader who was kind of in charge of those people. Lay people were growing because they were involved in the works of mercy. They're growing. They're leading. They're growing. And they're being held accountable. Preachers don't like it coming around every couple of weeks. We want to be there every Sunday. We want to be the pastor. So you lay people, take a step back, please. I will do this. I will be the one. And we lost the class leader as a person who's caring for the souls of men. That's a preacher's job. When I went to my church 28 and a half years ago, I went to help them find a pastor. We're still looking. But at some point they said, we want you to be our pastor because, we're connected. I said, okay, you got a problem. Number one, I already have 2 jobs. I was teaching full-time plus at Wesley College, and I was a vice president. And I said, I don't mind doing it, but here's the thing. Ephesians chapter 4 says, the role of the pastor is to train the saints for the work of the ministry. Shepherds don't give birth to sheep. Sheep give birth to sheep. The shepherd shepherd the sheep. So I said, my understanding of what Paul's saying is, you can't hire me to do your ministry. My first church, that's a whole story in itself. I would need a whole weekend just to explain it to you. Crazy. In my first church, I was young and dumb. And one day a lady said to me something that kind of hurt my feelings. She said, I don't know what we were disagreeing on, but she said, preacher, this is our church. I was here before you got here and I'll be here after you leave. It offended me. Then I thought, she's right. She's absolutely right. And when I went into my next church, I said to them, you cannot hire me to do your ministry. Now this is terrible. But I said to them, I don't have a lot of time to do visitation. Somebody wants to come, hey, look, you invite me to dinner, I'm there for you. You're in the hospital, you want me to come see you? I will come see you. You need a funeral, wedding, I can do counseling? Yes. Don't expect me to drive around the community knocking on people's doors. I don't have time for that. They said, we'll do it. I said, okay. I say, well, listen, here's my understanding of the church being a Methodist. I think Sunday school teachers ought to be caring for the souls of the... Look, if somebody in your Sunday school class is sick, you're the one who's supposed to go visit them, not me. I mean, there may be some time that I do, but the main care, they need their food. You know, we do a lot of food stuff. I don't know about you guys here, but I'm in the country. We you know, somebody's sick, we pile them up with food. I shouldn't be organizing that. I don't take the trash out. I'm not below it. I'm not saying I never do it. I'm not in charge of putting the trash cans out or getting them. I'll tell you what I do. Every Wednesday night, I cook for my church. There's only like 80 or 90 people, so it's not like a couple of hundred. But I cook for them most Wednesday nights. But that's something I do because I want to do it. But the ministry of that, I said, this is your church. And I think preachers die young and burn out young because they take on the whole thing. And here's the thing. Your pastor back here has some gifts. He doesn't have all the gifts. I don't even know him, but I can tell you right now, he doesn't have them all. If you put everything on him, your church is going to be lacking something. Because all of us have gifts, and when you put us all together, we're a picture of Jesus. It takes all of us working all of our gifts to make this thing happen. So I think when preachers in Methodism took over the main ministry of the church, discipleship ministry, I think it was somewhat of a mistake. But churches expect it. My first church, again, I was young and dumb and a little brash. One time I told them, we were talking about I was talking about the rapture or something, and I said, hey, if the rapture happens next Saturday night, you guys have church without me. Anyway, I was rash with them like that. But I said one time I said, you guys pay me to take the trash out. I preach for free. That's what I told them. Anyway, they just expected everything. But this church, I said, hey, this can't happen. It can't happen that way. It doesn't work. So let me tell you, we've grown because of that. They've grown spiritually, and the church has grown physically because of that. Class meetings. Okay, now, let me go on. I get stuck, yeah. Come on. Now, why did they do it? What's the purpose? How does it work? Why does that class meeting, that band thing, why is it so impactful? Okay, I just thinking of it in my own study of it, I have 5 reasons why it's so important. Number 1, education. This is a moment when you have a class meeting, and a class meeting is like basically a Bible study or a sharing group, whatever you want to call it. Now, Wesley didn't use those as Bible studies, by the way. There is a statement in the minutes, I was looking for it and I couldn't find it, where he said, I think the sharing meeting is more impactful than a Bible study. He did believe that. Not that you would never have any Bible study. Obviously, the society meeting was more of that. But this is education. You need to educate people. Part of the discipleship process is to help people grow and learn and be educated in some things. So you have people in your group who don't know some stuff. So in the process of that class meeting, or the band meeting, you can actually help people because we're talking. Just like in our break here. You're talking, you're sharing, you can learn some things. People ask questions, you can learn some things during that. Education part, it's important, but it's not everything. When you think about a Bible study, if you're the Bible study teacher, you're thinking probably only about education. I want to teach this lesson. See, the class meeting, as Wesley designed it, the sharing group class meeting thing, is not a Bible study. However, it's not to say there won't be any education. Because, by the way, if Adam is in my group and he's awakened, but he's not born again yet, he may even ask in that time, well, hey, this is what's happening to me. What do I need to do? How do I grow in this? Okay, it's a time for him to get some education. Let's talk it out. Number 2, accountability. In the class meetings, they ask themselves, did you read the Bible? How'd you do it? You know, what did it do? Either in the meeting itself or in the home meeting where the class leader came to you, he was going to search out whether you were in the means of grace, both works of piety, works of mercy. Are you doing it? Now, here's what's interesting. If we're in a class meeting together and we come together and I say, Adam, how was your... Now, if you know I'm going to ask that, you're more likely to do it this week because I'm going to call you out on it if you didn't do it. And so you're going to do it. That's accountability. So that's the thing. See, if somebody gets awakened, but they're not in a group, they're just by themselves, they're at home, no real connection, but they're awakened, who's going to say, are you reading your Bible? Are you praying? Somebody's got to ask that question to them because otherwise they go home and they do something else and they get over it. A lot of people were moved in church, but they go home and get over it. It's because we don't have our hands on them. Accountability. Number 3, Wesley's phrase, this is what he said about the Anglican church, they weren't caring for the souls of men. I love that statement, caring for the souls of men. We need to care for people's souls. And you know what he said? He said you have to give a soul time and means to grow. You think about that. Time, patience, and means. What are the means of growth in the soul? We know what they are. We already talked about those. Caring for the souls of men. Help them, give them time and means to grow. So you go along and you say, how's it going with you? Well, I'm really struggling. Where are you struggling? Okay, help them out. Show them in the Bible. Show them how to read that Bible. Pray with them. Show them how to pray. Show them how to get desperate with God. I remember in my first church, again, they were crazy. I remember this guy, he said, hey, why don't you come to my house tomorrow and we'll have a little prayer meeting. My brother-in-law and me, we want to pray with you. I said, okay. So I thought, let's just blow these guys' minds. Let's just take them someplace they've never been. So I don't know what they were expecting. They didn't know what they were expecting. But here's what I did. He had a coffee table. I said, first of all, guys, take your shoes off. What? I said, we're on holy ground. We took our shoes off. I said, here's what we're going to do. Don't say anything until you hear from God. What? I thought we were just going to pray. I said, no, you don't say anything until you hear from God. It's fun. Number 4, the practice of holiness. In the class and the bands, and particularly in the bands, but even in the classes, you're learning how to be holy. What does it look like? I remember, this was a kind of a discipleship thing. There was a guy, I would take him to lunch all the time, and I'll tell you about 2 guys. One guy, Chris Garcon, I call him. I picked him up on a Friday. Every Friday, I picked him up and we went to Schlotzsky's. I do like some Schlotzsky's. And Schlotzsky's likes me. So I picked him up and we're going down the road and I said, Chris, where are we going? He said, are we going to Schlotzsky's? I said, think so? He said, yeah. I said, how do you know that? He said, that's where we generally go. I said, how are you going to get there? He said, you're driving. I said, so what, you just got in my car? He said, yeah. I said, think about it. God's got some place he's taking you. All you got to do is get in the car. You just got to get in there. You got to get in the right place. In southern Indiana, where I'm from, Skunk Holler, we always said you got to get under the spout where the glory comes out. You have to find that place, and so you have to help people understand where that place is. Where is that place where you grow? What is that thing you do where you begin to grow spiritually? That's what you want to do there. The other illustration I was going to give was another guy I did the same thing with every Friday, except this guy, when I met him, okay, he was solidly Christian. I mean, solidly sold out Christian. But his attitude toward people was crazy. I mean, he was like his dad, I think. He was expecting perfection, even though he's not perfect. And so he would get very angry with people because of their imperfection. And man, he would lash out. And so I said, let me ask you about something, about the way you responded to that lady. He said, what about it? I said, do you think that was like Jesus? So see, that's what I'm saying. Both accountability and the practice of holiness. That's I would call that pruning. At some point, you got to prune. And you got to be able to say, hey, listen, what you're doing isn't what God's looking for in you. He's got this thing. Yes, sir.
All of this can only happen within like building relationships and trust.
It's
You can't
absolutely.
do that to
No, you can't just walk up to somebody and say, hey, you're not like Jesus. It's not going to work. As I said before, that'd be spiritual trespassing. You have to gain the right to plow in somebody's field. That's correct. But in the relationship of the group, we begin to build this trust and this sharing life together. So the word koinonia, often it's translated as fellowship, but we get koinonia, community, communion. Those are words that come out of the word koinonia. And so as we share life together in this group, we begin to impact each other, hopefully in the positive, in the sense of practice of holiness. And then, of course, these things also, they did works of mercy. They not only works of piety, they did works of mercy in the classes. Maybe as a class you could do it, but also you should be encouraging each other. Hey, what are you doing? How are you sharing your life this week? What did you do to share life? Talk it up. This week I did this. I had this opportunity. I was able to, whatever it is, talk that thing up. And it's very interesting to begin to think about how you impact people. This is what the band can do, is help you understand exactly what you're doing and what it does, how it works. Okay, questions, comments?
Was there actually a time, Methodist, was there actually a time where these society classes and bands were implemented? Is it a church?
No, it wasn't a church. It wasn't a denomination. This was Wesley's, they did it. In fact, you know what he did? You had to go to the class meeting. This was not the original way, but eventually you had to go to the class meeting in order to go to the society meeting. So when you came together in the society meeting, that's everybody. Everybody there had been in a class meeting that week. You think about the power of that. But they weren't a denomination. They weren't having church on Sunday morning. You went to the local church, wherever your church was, probably Anglican church.
When did it become a denomination?
1784 in America, and then after Wesley's death. Wesley said, as long as I'm alive, no, but after I'm dead, you guys can decide. After his death in 1791, it became a denomination in England. But 1784, the Christmas Conference, Baltimore, what was the church called? The Lovely Lane Chapel. They had their a conference and formed as a denomination, Christmas Day.
So when it became a denomination,
Yes?
then the church was the society?
Yes. They stopped having society meetings, and you basically Sunday morning takes up the church, the society thing. And then they had classes and bands. And then eventually bands and classes began to fade out,
So everybody in the church, in the society, was assigned to a class?
To a class. You had to go to a class. Yes. You had a ticket. And if you didn't have a ticket, you could go to the society meeting. So you got to go to the class to get in the society meeting. You think about how powerful that is, though. That's interesting if you think about how that was impacting them. And that's how it grew. It grew by leaps and bounds that way. But we think we know better. So, but yeah, it's this thing's bothering me. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. But yeah, that's exactly it. They did implement it. It did work, but eventually it faded out in America.
Is there any place where it's still like
People are still doing it. There's some GMC churches really trying to crank it up and do it. I just had a class called Wesleyan Classes Advanced it's a 6-week not for credit class, and we talked about how to do it, how to do classes advanced, how to train your class leaders. I had a guy from the Texas GMC conference, Trinity conference maybe. He teaches that, and he came and did that class. You can look him up online. His name is John Wayne McMahon, and he's got some videos on classes and bands. You should really watch those and take a look at it. It can be done. It can be done right, and some churches are doing it really well. Let's see. I think over here, then here. Yes, ma'am. No, not every class member went to a band. Bands were less people did that. That was for the really deeper, so a lot of people didn't. The class, no, just the class. If you were in a band, you were also in a class. Everybody was in a class, and then some were in bands, and then all of them from the class went to the society. So classes and society were all the same. Bands were somewhat less, but you had to be in a class to go to a band, yeah. Now, why do you have to be in a class to go to a band? Well, if you think about it, if you're not in the means of grace, but you're going to go to a band, so the class was more about being accountable to the means of grace, and so bands went deeper. But if you're not in this, how do you really do that correctly? So you got to really be in both. Now, what we've gone to is Sunday school classes. Sunday school, I know we give Robert Rakes the credit for that, but really what we do in Sunday school is more a reflection of the Methodist class meeting than Robert Rakes, I think. But yeah, I think that's it. But that's kind of a fade down because we go to a little teaching town. We want to do a little teaching in there, and it's not the same. You're not holding people accountable. You're not caring for the souls of men necessarily. Now, you could. One time, I went to a church in Decatur, Alabama, and talking to their Sunday school teachers, and I showed them this principle. Their church was running about 250, and I said, how many people do you think your pastor can minister to? He's only one person. How many? And he's limited in his gifts. How many people can he really disciple? Jesus didn't quite do 12. He had 12, and one of those betrayed him, and all of them ran away. How many people do you think one guy can do? 250? Really? Well, who's supposed to be discipling these people? I said, it's like a bill. I used to do this thing about why your church won't grow. There's 7 points in this house, in a little church I built. One of them is the roof. If your roof's not high enough, you can only minister to so many people. So maybe he's good, and he can really do 50 or 60 people. What happens to the other 140, 200 people that's in his church? They're not going to get what they need. So there's only 2 ways to raise the roof. You hire more staff, which you have to do sometimes, or you get your lay people to do some of that ministry. And I said, you Sunday school teachers, which is who I was talking to, you Sunday school teachers ought to be caring for the souls of your class. Pastor shouldn't have to. Somebody's in the hospital, go visit them. Go take them food at their house when they need it. Go ask them the questions about their spiritual life. Disciple them. You don't need the pastor to do that. That's what your job is. In fact, I made the argument that day, although I don't say I fully believe this, but it could be said, the concept of bishop in the first century, second century, was probably more of a senior pastor role, and the concept of pastor-teacher was more of a Sunday school teacher role. Because bishop was in the first century into the second, was an overseer of a single church. What we would call the senior pastor. That's the bishop. So who's the pastor-teacher? In fact, in the second century, what's his name? Justin Martyr, he got his last name the hard way. Justin Martyr said that in the church, it was originally the person leading the service, he called him the president. Well, who is that? Who is that? So, it was a layperson, obviously, of some sort, that was leading that service. So I think we have way too much expectation that a pastor is supposed to do the ministry when, in fact, the pastor should be shepherding you in your ministry. And that's why the classes, I think it's imperative. It's imperative for somebody who's going to grow to be in a class, but you got to have then people willing to share and to care for the souls of men. Questions or comments? Was there one over here?
Oh, actually, it was about the pastors, really, the increasing the staff as the church gets bigger.
Yeah.
And that it almost, I don't want to say it takes away it's not power of the people, but it disincentivizes, okay, fine, just feed me.
If it's not done correctly, right? That shepherd, each pastor being a shepherd, so you add an extra shepherd. If he's shepherding the lay people to do the work of the ministry, then yeah, it's good. If it's just for him to do the ministry, I'll give you an example. My lay leader at my church, he's no longer there, praise the Lord. One day he said to me, he's a businessman, he said, my business friends, he said, they have this ministry they're involved in and they're telling me we ought to be involved in it. I said, what is it? Well, there's a men's shelter in Jackson called the Billy Brumfield House, and once a month, their church feeds the men at Billy Brumfield. And they're telling us, they're encouraging. I said, oh, that's fantastic. I've worked with lots of missions. I said, yeah, that's fine. So he and his wife and me and my wife and another couple, we went and did it for the first time. And you know what he said after we got done? He said, there you go. I said, there I go what? He said, there it is, man, take it. I was like, did you think I needed something else to do? You started this for me to do? I don't mind going to help sometime, but the apostles said, I'm not going to wait tables. We've got to teach. We got to be in this thing here. So I said, I don't mind helping, but no, I'm not looking for something else to do, dude. So we put a person in charge of it, and we do it 12 times a year in that particular place. And so the guy organizes, and you know what? I'm not even one of the 12. I don't even have a month to do. It's interesting. We're working with 3 shelters, and but somebody is working with the 3 shelters. I love that kind of work, but I'm not doing it. I'm not leading that because that's their ministry. That's what they need to do. So yeah, I agree. It's all about the perspective. Yeah.
I would call that managing up. He thought he was helping.
Yeah, managing up. Yeah, there you go. Right. Yeah, managing up. That's what you need.
So all the things that you were talking about, I think all of us have heard it in some way, but growing up as Methodist, I never knew my husband. I never knew what the doctrines were of being
Yeah.
a Methodist. I was just a Methodist. So it's very helpful in that education part.
Yeah.
Not only to educate about Jesus,
Yeah.
but also about my own
Yes. Exactly. All the things I've said today about what is grace, how it works, Trinitarian life, all this is what I'm doing in the people I'm discipling. This is what I'm teaching them. Because this is the Methodist context. The understanding of grace is different than some people. How you receive that grace is different than some groups. It's a very distinct worldview in Methodism, and this is why we do what we do. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I wasn't raised a Methodist, but even so, as a believer in any church,
Sure.
you're trained to kind of come and receive. Even if you want to share or walk beside someone else or grow, there haven't been really like, when you said, if they ask you the Lord God, you were like, share with them? So
Yes. Also, if I were, say, in Adam's position here, I think, like a discipleship pastor, something like that. If I were in his position, here's what I would do. I'm not telling him what to do, but here's what I would personally do. I would start a group of some people that I thought could be group leaders, and I would meet with that group probably, 10 or 12 weeks. We would do our own class meeting, and then at that point, I would begin to meet maybe once a month with that group because they were meeting every week with their own group. And I would then take that once a month meeting to do some training, give you a little more. In the first 10 or 12 weeks, I would share all this we've been talking about, how it works. We would get into that. And then as you move to your own groups, once a month, I would say, how's your group going? What problems have you come up with? What do you need to know? And then I would give education to the leaders, and I'd be working with leaders. And I say that because this is exactly what I did at my church. I came in there and I thought, how do you start? Well, you start with a couple of people. I chose a couple of people I thought could be leaders, and I taught them how to do inductive Bible study and discipleship. I taught them how to disciple while I was discipling them, and then I gave them the way to do it. And then I started this one lady. She's fantastic. She would call me about 10 o'clock at night. I'm an early to bed person. She'd call me, I'm in Matthew chapter 5, and I'm looking at this verse. Okay, I'd help her. But then, eventually she called me less and less, and she's doing ministry, and she's like, how do I do this ministry? How do I do this? I teach her. Eventually she stopped asking because she was doing it. And I'm going on to others, And so you start with a couple of leaders, and then you just kind of have to step back and let them do their thing, and you help them a little bit as you get more going. You find more leaders, and as they have groups, they'll say, I got this guy who's really a good leader. Okay, I start another group with leaders, and I start going. That's how I would do it. So I think that's it. But opportunities and education are important, yeah. Tools and targets, I call it. You have to give people tools to do discipleship and also give them targets. Maybe connect them with some people that they can disciple.
So the original concept was to have societies, class meetings, and bands. How do you see that the Methodist churches these days are organized as?
Not much like that. Now, although in the Global Methodist Church, of which you're a part, right? They are trying to really reintroduce this stuff. They're trying to get back to this.
Because it's more efficient?
Oh, it works, yes. I know in my church, okay, so I had these young people. They weren't very spiritual, I didn't think, I started having these, we just called them sharing meetings. I didn't even bring a lesson, tell you the truth. This is kind of how it worked. I just showed up, and we're just talking, and then I asked a question. I just asked, I can't even think of one off the top of my head here, but I did then. I never really had them prepared. I just asked some spiritual question, and I mean to tell you, it went from there. And I could see people literally, not really, I could see people growing spiritually in front of my eyes in those meetings. It's weird. That's the best, most efficient way for somebody to grow is in a small group. It's the most efficient way.
When we were looking at the means of grace, we didn't drill down into Christian conferencing. Is that?
That's a part of the groups, yeah. Christian conferencing as one of the regular means of grace. Again, you have the capacity to share the grace in you with someone else. So Margarita, I just like saying it, Margarita, she comes and she's upset. And so I'm able to comfort her, or I'm able to help her somehow. Or maybe I'm really nervous about something and she's able to say, hey, well, and she gives me some encouragement, and she helps me. People, even with that being spiritual, that's help. But man, when you're both Christians, you both have the Holy Spirit, there's some connection, and you're able to really strengthen somebody else spiritually. You walk with somebody. It's easy to fall, but when somebody else is carrying you. One time, can I tell you something very unspiritual? I was not Christian at the time. I was on the front row of a ZZ Top concert. 1982, Louisville, Kentucky. I levitated. There were so many people there. I had people pushing me on each side, and suddenly my feet were not on the floor. Now, that when I became a Christian, that happened to me. I went to this little church that had nothing going on. But these couple of old people in there, they were so encouraging to me. I wanted to go back and see. I would have missed them not going to church on Sunday. But they were always concerned, and they were always caring, and they were always lifting me up and holding me accountable. And man, it's easy to fall when you're walking by yourself, but with a couple of people on every arm, it's much easier to make it, you know. So it's the most efficient way. Yeah, it is. It's personal. And that it is personal. That's the key. Yeah. Now, your pastor can't be that personal with everybody.
Yeah.
There's no way. I don't care how good he is. There's no way. How many people you got here? How many active people? 750. Impossible for him to be that personal with everyone. If he tried to disciple 750 people personally, he'd be dead in 2 weeks. It's impossible. It's not good. He's pretty good. He's pretty good. Now, from the pulpit, you can do some things, but I mean hands-on. Because again, the society meeting was about education. Yeah, from the pulpit, you can reach that 750. That's great. But the personal accountability and shaping of somebody, you can't do 750 people. What's that? Yes. Yeah, and when Wesley came around, he checked on the class leaders, and on occasion, he kicked them out. Class leader's not acting right. He's not either not doing his job or his own life is not good. He writes it down. He puts it in his diary or journal. Yeah, I went to this society, and the Mr. So-and-so, boom, I removed him as a class leader. Yeah. So somebody has to be over the class leaders who then are over the people.
You did mention there that Sunday school has kind of taken a little bit of that role.
Oh, Margarita. I just want to say your name again. Yes, Margarita. In some sense, we devolved into Sunday school because it's not doing the job. It's not really doing the job. It's not doing it well. Because we've made Sunday school a teaching time and not a sharing time. Now, we had a class that is based on the name of a book. What was it called? Oh, I can't remember. It was a really crazy name. We had this group, and it was basically a sharing group that met during Sunday school hour. And man, it was all women, you know, and it grew my church, not only numerically, but it grew them spiritually, because the lady who was teaching it was really good at this. They came in and they were sharing their issues, and man, they wanted to come to it, and they were coming and they were growing. Yeah.
Challenges you think that we need to overcome to be able to move back into.
Yeah. Well, okay, so there's a couple of things. Life is very busy. People don't have a lot of time. Second of all, people aren't used to being that open. They're a little scared of it. And so you have to build that just a little bit. And be patient with that. But that's a little weird for people. And I'm an older person now, so I can say this, but old people don't like it so much. They'd rather be preached to rather than a sharing group. I find that in my church. The old people are like, I'm not doing that. It's too personal. But, you know.
So then, when you said it works, what would you say, like, what's the measure of success? And so if you were
Measure of
saying that
success.
to the church of people who weren't here, what would you say? What's the
Yeah, the main bottom line is for people to grow spiritually. That's it. Now, you know, how do you measure that? I can measure it maybe by it's more by feeling maybe or discernment that you've grown. Over the last 10 weeks, you've grown in ways I can see it in you, you know. Particularly in the sense of classes, remember they were practicing the things they're like the means of grace. So, you know, when we first start, how often do you read your Bible? Well, maybe once a week. You know, hopefully in 10 weeks, you're going to be saying every week, yes, I read my Bible this week, and this is what I studied, and this is what I learned. So yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm looking for. Not just action, but growth. Growth. So I go back to my middle section about the learning to breathe, spiritual respiration. You've got to take in God's grace every day in multiple ways and breathe out God's grace. By loving God, and which means loving others, because that's how you love God, is by loving others. Praise, prayer, and thanksgiving, Wesley said, are the very breath of one who's been born of God. Okay? Adam, Pastor, Pastor, maybe turn it to you.
Let's take we're going to do another break.
Okay.